Captain Alaric Cade always said that the universe had a sense of humor, albeit one that lacked any sense of fairness. This thought circled his mind like a lazy vulture as he stared at the data stream on the monitor. The readouts were grim, and even more disturbingly, they were accurate. "So," Alaric muttered, scratching his chin with the kind of resignation reserved for tax audits and ex-spouses, "the moon's been hijacked." Just when you think you've seen it all, his second-in-command, LT Zara Voss, chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "I guess someone got tired of flying economy," she said, adjusting her glasses to peer more closely at the screen. "Wonder if it came with a complimentary bag of peanuts." Alaric snorted. "I'd bet my last credit it was gluten-free peanuts." The space station Solstice orbited a dying star, much like how flies orbit a decaying fruit. A fitting metaphor, Alaric always thought, for the state of the universe. At least the view was good, assuming you enjoyed staring into an abyss that constantly threatened to eat you alive. "Got the team prepped?" Alaric asked, knowing full well it was a rhetorical question. "As much as we ever are," Zara replied, her voice as dry as the recycled air they breathed. "Tarek's got that look in his eye again. You know the one," Alaric grimaced. "The I can fix it with duct tape and dreams look. The very same." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Engineer Tarek Mendel entered the command center, half a sandwich stuffed into his mouth. "MMF, what's all this about the moon?" he mumbled, crumbs cascading down his uniform like confetti at a very sad party. "You know the usual," Alaric quipped. "Just a celestial body deciding it's time for a walkabout. Probably needed a new perspective on things." Tarek swallowed hard and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I blame the gravity," he said. "Always pulling things down, never letting anyone just float away." "That's philosophy, Tarek," Zara chimed in, "not engineering." "Ah, but my dear Zara, the universe runs on both," Tarek grinned, plopping down in his seat with the grace of a collapsing star. The command center was a chaotic symphony of beeping monitors and blinking lights, each a reminder of how close they all were to oblivion. The entire crew of the Solstice was crammed into the room, watching the moon's trajectory with the same level of concern you'd expect from people watching their favorite sports team lose miserably. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alaric started, standing up from his chair and stretching his arms wide, "we find ourselves in the unenviable position of witnessing the moon being hijacked. And before you ask, no, this is not an elaborate prank." "Damn," muttered Ensign Gillian Park, who had already started rummaging through her drawer for the secret stash she wasn't supposed to have. "I was hoping it was a surprise birthday party." "Sorry to disappoint," Alaric replied. "We still have cake, though it's a bit stale. And by stale, I mean it's likely to bounce if dropped." The situation was dire, but levity was all they had left to cling to. The rest of humanity, blissfully unaware in their planetary cocoons, couldn't fathom the scale of the problem. The moon wasn't just a big rock in the sky. It was a symbol, a constant, and now it was moving in ways that defied any reasonable explanation. "Any bright ideas?" Alaric asked the room, knowing full well bright ideas were in short supply. "We could try asking it nicely to return," Zara suggested. "I hear celestial bodies have a soft spot for good manners." "Or," Tarek interjected, "we could send someone out there to give it a push." "Volunteer?" Alaric raised an eyebrow. Tarek shrugged. "I mean, if we can strap enough thrusters to a spacesuit, anything's possible." Gillian snorted. "Only if you promise not to come back." As the banter continued, the seriousness of the situation slowly seeped back into the room like an unwelcome guest. They were facing an unprecedented challenge, and their best ideas were as useful as a third arm in a thumb war. "In all seriousness," Alaric said, his voice dropping the jocular tone, "we need to figure out who's behind this and why." Zara sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I bet it's those damn space cults again. They've always had a hard-on for celestial real estate." "Or a rogue AI deciding it's about time the moon got some upgrades," Tarek chimed in. Alaric scratched his head. Either way, if we don't act soon, Earth's going to wake up to a rude surprise. And trust me, no one likes waking up to find the moon missing. What's our next move then, fearless leader? Jillian asked, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Alaric thought for a moment. We'll need to send out a reconnaissance team. Get a closer look, gather intel. And by closer look you mean, Zara started, gesturing dramatically, let's send the expendables to poke the bear and see if it bites back. Exactly, Alaric nodded deadpan. Just don't tell them they are expendable. Bad for morale, that. The room fell into a contemplative silence. The task ahead was daunting, the stakes higher than ever. But then again, when wasn't there something trying to kill them? All right, Alaric clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention back. Let's get some volunteers for the suicide, air reconnaissance mission. Tarek, ever the optimist, raised his hand. I'll go. I've always wanted to see how far I can push the laws of physics before they push back. Zara rolled her eyes. You just want an excuse to tinker with the thrusters again, don't you? You caught me, Tarek admitted, grinning sheepishly. Alaric chuckled. All right, Tarek, you're in. Anyone else? A few hands tentatively rose, less from enthusiasm than from the knowledge that refusal could mean worse jobs like cleaning out the recycler. Great, Alaric said, looking around at the assembled crew. We've got a team. Let's make sure the moon isn't hosting an unauthorized party. Last thing we need is to be outdone by a rock. As preparations for the mission began, Alaric watched his crew work with a mix of pride and trepidation. They were good people, even if they were the last best hope of a species that couldn't seem to get out of its own way. Captain, Zara said, stepping up beside him as the team gathered their gear, you think we've got a chance? Against whoever thought hijacking the moon was a good idea, Alaric shrugged. We're human, Zara. We've always been punching above our weight. Zara laughed, a genuine sound in the midst of chaos. I guess that's why we're still here, staring down the universe and flipping at the bird. Exactly, Alaric said, watching as the team departed, their fate as uncertain as the moon's trajectory. Now let's hope the universe isn't in the mood to punch back. The reconnaissance team was crammed into a shuttle barely larger than Alaric's last pay raise, which was saying something. Tarek was at the controls, and judging by the way he was muttering to himself, the odds of success were somewhere between no way in hell and sure if you believe in miracles. Remember, Alaric's voice crackled over the comms, this isn't one of those times where you can afford to be distracted. Focus. No staring longingly into space unless you're looking for danger. Don't worry, boss, Tarek replied. There's nothing outside but the cold, empty void, just like my ex's heart. Keep your eyes peeled for any Qatari signs, Zara added. If you see tentacles or hear ominous chanting, make sure to scream into the mic before you're disintegrated. The Qatari. An alien species known for their charming habit of conquering worlds, the way people collect stamps, an ironic pastime for beings with no discernible form of government or postal service. As the shuttle blasted off, the solstice shrank behind them, a glittering ring around the dying star that served as a reminder of the universe's sense of humor. The moon loomed ahead, its surface pale and crater-pocked, a celestial orphan that had apparently run away from home. Think it ran out of cheese? Ensign Naya quipped from her seat, her voice tinged with nervous energy. More like someone's trying to turn it into Swiss, Tarek shot back, his hands working the controls with the grace of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The shuttle approached the moon with all the subtlety of a drunk elephant. Tarek adjusted their trajectory, ensuring they wouldn't end up as another crater on its already pockmarked surface. They skimmed low over the terrain, scanning for anything unusual, which, given the circumstances, was a pretty broad category. There, Naya pointed. That doesn't look like rock. On the moon's surface was a sprawling structure, all sharp angles and glinting metal, as out of place as a suit at a nudist colony. The Qatari hadn't just hijacked the moon, they were turning it into a weapon. Well, that's just great, Tarek said, peering at the readouts. Looks like we're staring at a potential moon-sized death ray. Why settle for Death Star when you can have a Death Moon? Naya mused. Smaller footprint, same big boom. Alaric's voice crackled through the comms again. Find a way to get inside. We need intel, and I'd prefer it not come with a side of vaporization. Copy that, Tarek replied, his tone suggesting he'd rather be copying anything else. They landed the shuttle in a lunar dust storm of their own making, the engine's roar echoing in the thin atmosphere. With a hiss, the hatch opened and the team clambered out, their boots crunching on the regolith like someone stepping on bone. Welcome to the moon, Tarek said, gesturing grandly. Population us, and possibly a few unwanted guests. Please keep all limbs inside the vehicle at all times. They made their way towards the alien structure, the lunar horizon curving away into nothingness. Closer up, the building was even more intimidating, a mishmash of alien technology that seemed to violate several laws of physics purely out of spite. Feels like we're knocking on Satan's front door, Naya muttered, eyeing the structure warily. And he's not expecting company, Tarek agreed. Closer inspection revealed an entrance of sorts, a hatch, alien in design but still recognizable as something that was meant to open. Tarek got to work, fiddling with a control panel that looked more like modern art than technology. Straightforward, right? Naya asked, watching Tarek's efforts with an expression caught between hope and dread. Yeah, like solving a Rubik's Cube while it's on fire, Tarek grumbled. But hey, nothing like pressing random buttons and hoping for the best. His fingers danced over the panel, and with a reluctant groan, the hatch slid open, revealing a corridor filled with an eerie, pulsing light. After you, Tarek said, gesturing gallantly. Ladies first into the jaws of doom. Inside, the structure was as alien as they feared. The walls hummed with energy, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and impending doom. It was the kind of place that made you reconsider every life choice that had led you to this point. Doesn't exactly scream homey, Naya observed, her voice echoing in the silence. Unless your idea of home is a haunted house, Tarek replied. Built by aliens. They moved deeper, careful not to touch anything that might explode, implode, or otherwise complicate their already complicated lives. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, dominated by a colossal machine that looked like it was capable of rearranging a planet's geography in the same way one might rearrange furniture. That's a lot of firepower, Naya said, eyes wide. Yeah, Tarek agreed. Enough to turn Earth into a coffee table. The realization hit them all at once. The moon wasn't just a hijacked lump of rock, it was a weapon aimed directly at Earth, and the Qatari intended to use it with all the enthusiasm of a kid trying out a new toy on Christmas morning. We need to disable this thing, Tarek said, already moving towards the machine. Preferably without getting blown to bits. Good plan, Naya replied. I'd like to keep all my bits where they are, thank you. They worked quickly, Tarek's hands a blur as he bypassed circuits and rerouted power, actions that felt suspiciously like poking a lion with a stick and hoping it wouldn't bite. The machine hummed ominously, and for a moment, Tarek wondered if he was about to join the final frontier as Stardust. How's it going? Naya asked, watching Tarek as if expecting to see sparks flying from his fingertips. About as well as expected, Tarek said, his voice strained. Which is to say, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm doing it with confidence. Finally, with a triumphant click, the machine's hum dropped to a low, disgruntled grumble, a sound that Tarek decided was as close to victory as they were going to get. There, he said, stepping back. It's not dead, but it's mostly harmless. Mostly, Naya repeated, looking skeptical. Hey, it's an improvement, Tarek shrugged. Let's get out of here before it changes its mind. They retraced their steps, the alien structure now a defeated beast, its threat minimized but not entirely eliminated. As they exited, Tarek glanced back at the looming edifice, feeling a pang of unease. Think the Qatari will notice? Naya asked. I'm sure they'll love the new open concept design, Tarek replied. Let's just hope they don't come looking for the renovation team. Back on the shuttle, they prepped for takeoff, the moon's surface receding as they lifted into orbit. The mood was tense, the weight of their discovery settling heavily on their shoulders. "Alaric," Tarek said into the comms, "we've got a situation. Big, alien, and potentially catastrophic." "Just another Tuesday, then," Alaric's voice crackled back. "Get back here and we'll figure out how to deal with the neighbors." As the shuttle hurtled back towards the solstice, Tarek couldn't shake the feeling that they'd merely delayed the inevitable. The Qatari were out there, watching, waiting. And the moon, hijacked and weaponized, was a reminder that the universe had a unique way of kicking you when you were down. "Think we've pissed them off?" Naya asked, watching the lunar surface grow distant. "I'd be surprised if we hadn't," Tarek shrugged. "But that's the thing about poking the universe. You never know if it's going to yawn or bite your hand off." The shuttle docked with the solstice and the team disembarked, weary but determined. Alaric and Zara met them in the hangar, their expressions a mix of relief and resignation. "Welcome back," Zara said, her voice heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. "Thanks," Tarek replied, patting the shuttle affectionately. "I think she's earned a drink." "We all have," Alaric said, his tone more serious than usual. "But first, tell me what you found." As Tarek briefed Alaric and Zara, the weight of their discovery settled over the crew. The Qatari weren't just a threat, they were a declaration of war, written in lunar dust and alien technology. "So," Alaric said when Tarek finished, "the moon's a gun and we're the target." "Pretty much," Tarek confirmed. "And unless we find a way to stop them, Earth's going to have a very bad day." "Then we'd better get started," Zara said, her voice firm. "Because if there's one thing we're good at, it's making the impossible slightly less impossible." "Here's to the human race," Alaric said, raising an imaginary glass. "Too stubborn to know when we're beat." As the crew set to work, the universe watched, its sense of humor as dark as the void itself. But then, if humanity was anything, it was stubborn. Stubborn enough to fight back, even when the odds were stacked higher than a lunar mountain. And as Alaric looked out at the stars, he couldn't help but smile, a wry, defiant grin in the face of oblivion. After all, if you couldn't laugh at the universe, what was the point? The Solstice crew gathered in the cramped briefing room, a space that smelled faintly like burnt plastic and old gym socks. Captain Alaric Cade, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else, was trying to get a connection to Earth. The comms panel blinked and beeped like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Well, this is going swimmingly," Alaric muttered, giving the console a slap that was only slightly more affectionate than a punch. "What's the matter?" Engineer Sable Thorne chimed in, her voice as dry as the moon's surface. "Did you forget to pay the Wi-Fi bill again?" Alaric shot her a look that could peel paint. "Apparently, the Qatari have figured out how to jam our signals. Probably a side feature of their moon-sized gun." "Figures," Sable said, crossing her arms. "They're hijacking moons, why not hijack our comms while they are at it? Overachieving bastards." Tarek leaned back in his chair, putting his feet up on the table, which earned him a glare from Zara. "So, we're cut off from Earth, and we've got a death ray pointed at our heads." "I've had hangovers more pleasant than this." "And less lethal," Naya added, twisting a lock of hair as she glanced at the blinking console. "Can't we just call tech support?" "Sure," Alaric replied. "You get Earth on speed dial, and I'll figure out what to say after we're all doomed." Zara shrugged, eyeing the console as if it might explode. "Maybe there's a way to piggyback on the Qatari's signal. Use their tech against them." Sable slapped a hand on the table, her eyes lighting up. "Now that's an idea. If we can hack into their systems, we might find a vulnerability to exploit." "Right," Alaric said, nodding. "I'd love to turn the tables. Show them that we're not just sitting ducks waiting for the blast." Tarek looked thoughtful for a moment, a rare occurrence that was often the harbinger of terrible ideas. "You think they left a backdoor in their security? You know, like forgetting to lock the door on the way out." Sable tapped a finger against her chin. "Possibly. Aliens tend to get cocky when they think they're technologically superior. It's a common trope." "Then let's see if we can make them regret ever underestimating human ingenuity," Alaric said, straightening up. Sable, you're on it. Pull us a rabbit out of this goddamned hat. Sable grinned, already gearing up to dive into the task. I'll find us a vulnerability. If there's a chink in their armor, I'll be the one to ram a stick in it. The meeting broke up, and the crew dispersed with renewed purpose. Sable headed straight for engineering, a place as chaotic as her thoughts, filled with tools, cables, and the unmistakable smell of melted circuitry. She sat at her terminal, fingers moving over the keys with the kind of precision that only came from years of prying open things that were supposed to remain closed. She was exploring the K-Tari signal, looking for anything that screamed, "I'm a weak point, exploit me." Tarek popped his head in through the hatchway. "How's it going? Find anything yet? Find anything," she snorted. "I've barely started." "You think alien tech just lays down and spills its secrets?" Was worth a shot. "How about I get you some coffee?" Tarek suggested. "Or something stronger. How about both?" Sable replied without looking up. "And hold the sass." "On it," Tarek said, disappearing with a mock salute. Sable continued to work, the Iors slipping by in a haze of concentration punctuated by swearing that would have made a sailor blush. The screen was a mess of alien code, a digital jungle that would have been impenetrable to anyone who didn't know how to navigate its tangled paths. As she delved deeper, she began to notice patterns, inconsistencies in the seemingly perfect code. "Oh, you clever little bastards," she muttered, eyes narrowing at the screen. "Talking to your terminal again?" Naya asked lightly as she wandered in, a steaming mug of something caffeinated in hand. "I brought reinforcements." "Thanks," Sable said, grabbing the mug and taking a sip. "I think I've found something. The K-Tari might be clever, but they are not invincible. They built their network with some redundancies that overlap. If I'm right, we could inject a little chaos into their order." Naya grinned. "So, you're saying we're going to give them a taste of their own medicine?" "Exactly," Sable said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I just need to create a feedback loop. Something that'll make their systems misfire, like setting a cat loose in a room full of rocking chairs. Once you pull this off, they won't know what hit them," Naya said, watching the lines of code scroll by. "You're like the digital David taking on Goliath here." "Let's hope it doesn't end with me flattened under his sandal," Sable replied, not taking her eyes off her work. "But hey, no guts, no glory." As Sable continued her mad dance with the K-Tari code, the ship hummed with a tense energy. Alaric watched from a distance, knowing that their fate might very well hinge on their ability to outsmart a superior alien race. Not exactly what he'd signed up for, but then, life had a way of throwing curveballs, often directly at one's face. The Iors stretched on, and the crew's nerves frayed, the tension thicker than the sludge they called coffee. But slowly, surely, Sable's plan came together, a patchwork solution built from human gumption and sheer bloody-mindedness. Finally, she leaned back, cracking her knuckles with a satisfied grin. "I've done it. The K-Tari's tech is about to have a very bad day." Alaric, looking like Hope had momentarily decided to visit, stepped over. "Are we talking fireworks bad or just embarrassing?" "Hopefully a bit of both," Sable replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I've set up a feedback loop that should create a cascading failure. It won't destroy their entire network, but it'll definitely make them sit up and take notice. And while they're busy with damage control, we might just get our message through." "Great," Alaric said, clapping her on the shoulder. "Let's light the fuse and see what happens." Sable hit the key, setting the plan in motion. Somewhere far away, the K-Tari systems would be lighting up like a Christmas tree, alarms blaring as their once impenetrable network began to unravel. "Now," Alaric said, turning to the rest of the crew, "let's try that message again. Tarek, get us a line to Earth." Tarek nodded, sliding into the comms chair with a flourish. "All right, let's see if we can yell into the void and get a reply." The room held its collective breath as the comms panel crackled and hissed, fighting through the interference. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally a voice broke through the static. "This is Earth Command. We read you, Solstice." "What's your situation?" The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, the tension in the room breaking like a wave. Alaric leaned over the console, his voice steady. "Earth Command, we've got a bit of a problem. The moon's been hijacked by the K'tari and turned into a weapon. We need backup, and we need it yesterday." There was a pause on the other end, the gravity of their words sinking in. "Understood, Solstice. We're mobilizing assistance. Hold tight and give us all the data you've got." "Copy that, Command," Alaric replied. "And hurry, we're not exactly sitting pretty out here." As the crew began transmitting all the information they'd gathered, Sable allowed herself a rare smile. They'd done it, turned the tables, if only for a moment. Naya nudged her, a grin playing on her lips. "So what's next on your list of impossible feats?" Sable chuckled. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe inventing a way to make instant coffee taste less like despair." Tarek laughed, the tension easing from his shoulders. "If you pull that off, you'll be a bigger hero than whoever saves Earth." The crew settled back into their routines, knowing that the real battle was still to come. But for now, they'd scored a victory, and in the grimdark depths of space, that was worth celebrating. Alaric stood at the viewport, his gaze fixed on the stars. "All right, folks," he said, a wry smile creeping onto his face. "We've poked the bear. Now let's see if we can outrun it." The universe, contemplative and unfathomable, continued its dance above them, indifferent to their struggles. But the crew of the Solstice was nothing if not resilient. And as Alaric watched the distant stars, he knew that whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, with humor, grit, and a healthy dose of irreverence. Because if the universe was going to laugh at them, they might as well laugh right back. The crew of the Solstice stood around the briefing room, the smell of burnt plastic and old gym socks hanging in the air like an unwanted guest. It was a cozy, intimate setting, perfect for discussing the imminent destruction of Earth. Alaric Cade, the captain with an unshakable talent for sarcasm, glanced around the room, noting the familiar faces of his crew. Each one reinforced the idea that in space, you didn't have to be crazy to survive, but it sure helped. "So," Alaric began, trying to sound more optimistic than a pessimist at a rainstorm, "we've poked the K'tari. Now it looks like they're planning to swat us back by sending their moon-sized gun on a direct course for Earth." Lieutenant Zara Voss, his second-in-command, snorted. "Well, who would have thought? We annoy them and they decide to crash a moon into us. Overreact much." Tarek Mendel, their perpetually inventive engineer, scratched his head, which was filled with more wild ideas than common sense. "It's like they're trying to win the intergalactic overreaction Olympics. Maybe they want to set some kind of record." Sable Thorne, the mastermind behind their brief moment of success, raised an eyebrow. "If they're going for gold, then Earth is the unsuspecting track and field." Alaric leaned forward, elbows on the table. "All right, let's not panic. Remember, panic is just chaos with better PR. We've got a vulnerability in their system. Sable's found us a crack to slip through. We just need to exploit it before the moon becomes Earth's new coat of paint." Tarek shot him a look. "Exploit it how?" "By asking nicely." "No, by kicking them where it hurts," Alaric replied. "We need to disrupt their control long enough for Earth to mount a defense." Naya, the communications whiz who'd orchestrated their call for help, looked up from her console with a slightly wicked grin. "If they're expecting a gentle negotiation, they are in for a surprise." The universe, seemingly taking sadistic pleasure in their plight, had indeed set the stakes high. The K'tari moon was inching its way toward Earth, and time was ticking away like a bomb in an action movie. Alaric needed his team to focus, but he could sense the tension simmering beneath the surface. "Look," Alaric said, his voice cutting through the cloud of doubt, "we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for our right to annoy each other in this tin can for just a bit longer." Zara chuckled, the sound like a dry desert breeze. "When you put it that way, how can we refuse?" "Okay, Sable," Alaric continued, "you've found a way in. Now we need to make sure the K'tari don't find a way to stop us before we can pull the trigger." Sable nodded, her mind already spinning through possibilities like a roulette wheel. "I'll need more than just a stick this time. We could try overloading their power grid, maybe cause a blackout. Tarek leaned back, feet dangerously close to their previous position on the table before Zara shot him a warning glare. And how exactly do we short-circuit an alien power grid? Call in the space electricians. Think of it like throwing a party, Sable explained. You crank up the music, add too many guests, and boom, the fuse blows. Alaric smirked. All right, let's crash their party. Tarek, any chance you can help Sable with the technical side of things? Try not to blow us up in the process. Hey, that was one time, Tarek protested, though his tone was more playful than defensive. And we all agreed the explosion was impressive. Just keep it controlled this time, Zara interjected dryly. As the crew plunged into planning, the reality of their situation hung over them like the shadow of the moon they were trying to stop. But they were human, and if history had taught them anything, it was that humans excelled at making things up as they went along. A couple of hours later, Sable was back in her element, hunched over her terminal. The engineering bay buzzed with the sound of her fingers clattering over the keys, interspersed with Tarek's occasional mutterings as he fiddled with circuits and wires. The entire ship felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Naya, Alaric called from the bridge, where he'd stationed himself like a captain demanding to go down with the ship, preferably much later. What's our status on the Qatari's trajectory? Naya, who was usually as calm as a pond on a windless day, looked slightly frazzled. They're moving faster than we expected. At this rate, they'll be in Earth's backyard before our next coffee break. We need more time, Alaric said, frustration creeping into his voice. Tell Sable and Tarek to work faster. They love that. Zara gave him a sidelong glance. You want them to move faster. Why don't we just threaten to play Tarek's music collection on the ship's speakers? Tarek, overhearing, shouted from the engineering bay, Hey, my music is an acquired taste. Yeah, acquired by who? Aliens with a vendetta, Zara shot back. The banter was familiar, grounding. It was a reminder that even as the universe threatened to end them, they were still themselves, and they were stubborn. Captain, Sable's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding as steady as ever despite the chaos. We're almost ready. Tarek and I have rigged a little surprise for our Qatari friends. Get ready to flip the switch. Alaric felt a flicker of hope, a rare visitor he often turned away at the door. Right. Let's make sure they remember the day they tried to outsmart the Solstice crew. The rest of the crew gathered around, each person a cog in this machine of misfits. Their roles were clear and the stakes were the highest they'd ever faced. Alaric could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, but he also knew something else. They were fighting for each other, and that meant they weren't fighting alone. All right, everyone, Alaric announced, his voice steady despite the situation. Let's show these Qatari what happens when you try to crash our party. We're going to throw everything we've got at them and hope it's enough. Zara, standing by his side, nodded. If they want to play rough, we'll show them just how rough humans can get. The universe, with its penchant for irony, had set them on this path. But they were going to meet it head-on, laughing in the face of the void. Because if the cosmos was going to mock them, they'd make sure it had a hell of a show to watch. Sable and Tarek's work had culminated in a plan that was equal parts insanity and brilliance, much like the crew itself. The idea was simple. Overload the Qatari systems just long enough to knock their moon-sized gun off course. It was a gamble, sure, but then again, space was built on gambles and blind luck. As the Solstice hummed with the anticipation of a soon-to-be-launched counterstrike, Alaric felt a strange calm settle over him. It was the kind of serenity that only came when you realized you were one step away from disaster and still had the audacity to think you might just survive it. All right, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command tempered with his usual irreverence. Let's do this. Sable initiated the sequence, her fingers flying over the keys with the kind of precision that would have made a concert pianist jealous. Beside her, Tarek stood ready, a tangle of wires in his hands that somehow made him look like he was orchestrating a symphony of chaos. The ship's systems flared to life, the lights dimming momentarily as power was rerouted to their makeshift assault. For a fraction of a second, it felt as if the universe held its breath, waiting to see if this ragtag team of spacefaring humans could actually pull off the impossible. Then, with a flash of lights and a sound that was somewhere between a roar and a banshee's wail, their plan was set in motion. The Solstice's system surged, sending out a pulse designed to scramble the Qatari's technological brains. On the bridge, Alaric watched the readouts, eyes flicking over the screens with the intensity of a gambler watching the last spin of the roulette wheel. Come on, he muttered under his breath, willing the universe to bend just this once in their favor. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity, until finally the console in front of him lit up with a series of alerts. "We've done it," Naya exclaimed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "Their systems are going haywire." Alaric allowed himself a tight grin. "Looks like we've given them something to think about." But the celebration was short-lived. As the Qatari systems faltered, the moon's trajectory began to shift, its path wavering like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. However, the danger wasn't over yet. They'd bought themselves time, but the moon was still barreling toward Earth, albeit now on a more erratic course. "That was just the opening act," Zara said, her eyes locked on the displays. "We need to keep this up if we want to divert it completely." Alaric nodded, feeling the gravity of their task pressing down on him once more. "All right, people, let's keep pushing. We're not out of the woods yet." The universe, a vast expanse of mystery and madness, watched as these tiny beings dared to defy it. And whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. The crew of the Solstice wouldn't go down without a fight, armed with nothing more than their wits, their grit, and a healthy dose of human stubbornness. As the ship continued its assault, Alaric knew that they were living on borrowed time. But for now, they were still standing, and that was something. In a universe that seemed hell-bent on making them the punchline, they were determined to have the last laugh. "Let's show them what humans are made of," Alaric said, his voice carrying over the noise of the ship's systems. "And if we go out with a bang." And somewhere in the vast, indifferent universe, a small ship fought against all odds, its crew standing together in defiance of the cosmos. Because if the stars were going to laugh, they'd make damn sure it was worth watching. The universe didn't care. Not about the ship, not about the crew, and certainly not about Earth, hanging out there in the black like a sitting duck. The crew of the Solstice had given the Qatari a good slap, but now came the nasty part, the realization that one slap doesn't win a brawl. Alaric Cade leaned back in his captain's chair, a rickety old thing that was one loose screw away from being a hazard. He wished he could put his feet up, but he'd used the last of the duct tape 2 weeks ago. "Well, that worked out about as well as a chocolate teapot," he muttered to himself. Zara Voss, ever the pragmatist, perched on the edge of the console beside him. "So what now, fearless leader? Do we just wait for the moon to give us a love tap?" "Sarcasm noted, Lieutenant," Alaric replied. "And appreciated. Let's brainstorm. Got any bright ideas that don't involve us getting squished?" Zara's smirk widened, a grim parody of cheer. "If you count screaming into the void and hoping it gets bored, then sure." Down in the engineering bay, Tarek Mendel and Sable Thorne were having what the optimistic might call a spirited discussion. The rest would probably just call it a shouting match. "Look, I'm telling you, we can't just reverse the neutron flow and hope for the best," Sable exclaimed, hands flailing like she was conducting the worst orchestra in the universe. "But if we just—" "No, Tarek. For the last time, we are not using the reactor as a giant space heater," Sable interrupted, her patience thinner than paper. Tarek threw his hands up in surrender. "Fine, no space heater. But we've got to do something, or we'll be cosmic roadkill." Alaric's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through their bickering like a knife. "Status update, geniuses. Are we about to be the universe's newest pancake?" Sable sighed, running a hand through her frazzled hair. "We've hit a snag, Captain. The Qatari systems are more sophisticated than we thought. It's like trying to out-hack a hacker who's also part octopus." "Well, that's just perfect," Alaric replied dryly. If we can't outthink them, we'll have to out-crazy them. Sable glanced over at Tarek, who was already fiddling with a pile of wires. Fortunately, we've got the crazy part covered. Back on the bridge, Alaric and Zara shared a look that conveyed 1,000 words, most of them unprintable. The situation was grim, and morale was sinking faster than a lead balloon. But they didn't have the luxury of despair, not unless they planned to make a career out of being space debris. Alaric cleared his throat, trying to inject a bit of levity into the gloom. All right, crew, let's not forget, we're the misfits who once crashed a Qatari banquet and walked away with their dessert cart. We've faced worse odds, Zara snorted. Yeah, and we used Tarek as a distraction then too. Hey, my karaoke is legendary, Tarek's voice piped up defensively over the comms. And I think they actually liked my rendition of Space Oddity. Liked isn't the word I'd use, Sable said, her tone somewhere between exasperation and amusement. More like tolerated under duress. But even as they traded barbs, the reality of their predicament loomed large. The moon was still on its relentless course toward Earth, and the Qatari weren't likely to have any change of heart. If anything, they'd probably be tightening their grip, just waiting for the solstice to make a fatal slip. Naya, the usually unflappable comm specialist, chose this moment to chime in from her station. Captain, I'm picking up some chatter from the Qatari. They are gloating. Alaric rolled his eyes. Of course they are. Anyone would think they'd never hijacked a moon before. Zara's gaze was fixed on the forward display, where the enormous mass of the moon filled their view. So they think they've got us beat, huh? Maybe it's time we remind them that humans are like cockroaches. We're really hard to kill. Lovely image, Alaric said with a wry grin. Remind me to put that on our recruitment posters. Despite the banter, Alaric knew that their options were running out. If they didn't come up with a plan soon, the Qatari would have the last laugh, and Earth would be nothing but a memory, a cautionary tale about what happens when you poke a cosmic bear. The crew huddled together in the briefing room, which still smelled like burnt plastic from the last time Tarek had tried to improve the air filtration system. Alaric leaned against the wall, arms crossed, trying to project the kind of confidence he definitely didn't feel. All right, folks, let's hear your worst ideas first. We'll save the good ones for never. Tarek raised a hand. We could try hacking into their entertainment system and play non-stop space operas until they surrender. Or, Sable countered, we could just ask them nicely. Maybe they'll see reason and let us go. The room was silent for a beat before Zara broke it with a sardonic chuckle. Yeah, because nothing says peace offering like a hijacked moon. Naya, who had been quietly scribbling notes, finally spoke up. Why don't we try overloading their jamming system? If we can get a message to Earth, maybe they can send help. Alaric considered this, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. And if nothing else, it'll give the Qatari something to chew on. Tarek nodded enthusiastically. I'll get on it, just as soon as I find my good tools, the ones Zara hasn't hidden yet. Try looking under delusions of grandeur in the storage locker, Zara quipped. The crew dispersed, each member heading off to their respective stations with a determination that belied the hopelessness of their situation. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was defying the odds, even when those odds were astronomical. Back in engineering, Tarek and Sable worked side by side, their hands moving with the kind of practiced ease that only comes from years of working together and a few near-death experiences. Tarek was knee-deep in cables, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tinkered with the ship's systems. You know, he said conversationally, if this works, I'll finally get to say I hacked an alien moon. That's going on my resume, Sable snorted, not breaking her focus. Assuming we live long enough for you to update it. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Alaric and Zara were monitoring the situation closely. The moon loomed ever larger in their view, a constant reminder of their impending doom. But Alaric refused to give in to despair. He'd faced down worse odds before, and he wasn't about to let some overgrown space rock be the end of him. "Well, I always said I wanted to go out with a spectacular view," Alaric said, gesturing to the moon. "But this is a bit much." Zara didn't look up from her console, but there was a hint of a smile in her voice. "You think this is spectacular? You should have seen my last vacation." "Volcanoes, Alaric." "Volcanoes. Remind me to take your travel advice in the future," Alaric replied dryly. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the ship ratcheted up to near unbearable levels. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop, hoping against hope that their plan would work. The silence stretched out, oppressive and heavy, broken only by the occasional beeps and whirs of the ship's systems. Finally, the comms crackled to life, and Tarek's voice came through, sounding more triumphant than it had any right to. "Captain, we did it. We've managed to send a signal. It's weak, but it's out there." Alaric didn't allow himself to hope, not yet, but he couldn't help the small spark of pride that flared in his chest. "Good work, Tarek. Now let's see if anyone's listening." The crew waited with bated breath, watching the monitors with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The moon was still bearing down on them, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a glimmer of hope. In the vastness of space, sometimes hope was all you had, and sometimes, if you were lucky, it was enough. "Here's to hoping someone's out there with a bigger stick than the K-Tari," Alaric said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to the universe. Zara clinked her invisible glass against his. "And if not, we'll go down swinging, because that's what we do." It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. But as long as they still had breath in their lungs and fire in their hearts, the fight wasn't lost. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but the crew of the Solstice was stubborn and irreverent, and they weren't about to let a little thing like certain doom get in their way. And as the stars looked on, maybe, just maybe, they were starting to root for the underdogs after all. The briefing room, with its lingering odor of burnt plastic and hopeful desperation, was once again the stage for the crew's latest act of lunacy. Captain Alaric Cade leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and a look that screamed, "What fresh hell is this?" plastered across his face. The rest of the crew was gathered around the table, crowded around Sable Thorne like she was about to reveal the secrets of the universe, or at least a half-baked plan to avert certain doom. "All right, Sable," Alaric drawled, tipping an imaginary hat. "Hit us with your masterstroke." Sable looked around the room, her eyes landing on each crew member as if sizing them up for a coffin. Finally, she took a deep breath. "We're going to use an ancient piece of Earth technology." There was a collective pause, the kind that usually follows someone suggesting they fight a bear with a toothpick. Tarek raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Please tell me you're not talking about duct tape." "Close," Sable said, a wry smile on her lips. "We're going to build a catapult." A beat, then laughter erupted. It was the kind of laughter that bordered on hysteria, the kind that only comes when you've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain from sheer absurdity. Zara leaned back in her chair, wiping a tear from her eye. "Oh, this is rich. I suppose next you'll want us to dress up as knights and storm their castle." "Look, I know it sounds crazy," Sable interjected, her tone more serious now. "But we can rig something together using the cargo launchers. It won't be pretty and it sure as hell won't be safe, but it might just work." Alaric scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I've always said if you're going to go down in a blaze of stupidity." "Exactly," Sable replied, deadpan. "Besides, the K-Tari won't be expecting it." "Because it's insane," Naya chimed in from her corner, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But who am I to argue with genius?" Tarek snorted. "Genius, insanity, at this point, what's the difference?" The plan was simple in theory, which, of course, meant it was bound to be a complete clusterfuck in practice. They'd repurpose one of the Solstice's cargo launchers, slap together a makeshift projectile from whatever scrap they could find, and launch it at the K-Tari systems, jamming their signal. It was a plan only a desperate fool would attempt, which made it perfect for them. Back in engineering, the atmosphere was chaotic. Tarek and Sable were neck-deep in jury-rigged contraptions, the space around them littered with wires, tools, and the occasional swear word. "You ever get the feeling we're living in a bad holo serial?" Tarek asked, fiddling with an old pressure gauge that looked like it had been around since the last millennium. Sable glanced up from her work, a smirk playing on her lips. "Every damn day. But at least we make for entertaining protagonists." Tarek chuckled, though it sounded more like a death rattle. "Protagonists usually survive till the end. We should be so lucky." "Luck's never been our strong suit," Sable replied, tightening a valve with more force than strictly necessary. "But we've got stubbornness in spades." They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, occasionally punctuated by the clang of metal or the hiss of escaping steam. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, filled with the weight of their shared history and the looming shadow of what was to come. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Alaric and Zara were keeping a wary eye on the moon, which loomed larger with every passing second. It was a reminder of their mortality, a specter of death hanging over their heads like the universe's worst punchline. Alaric's voice was the first to break the silence. "You know, when I signed up for this gig, I didn't think it would involve flinging junk at an alien moon." Zara snorted. "You're telling me I was promised adventure, excitement, and a whole lot less impending doom." "Well, look on the bright side," Alaric said, gesturing to the threatening mass of rock. "If we pull this off, we'll have a hell of a story to tell." "And if we don't?" she asked, her tone lighter than the question deserved. "We won't have to worry about retirement plans," Alaric replied, clapping her on the shoulder. Always a silver lining. The crew worked tirelessly, the minutes ticking away toward an uncertain future. But in the face of overwhelming odds, they found solace in their irreverence, camaraderie, and the shared belief that if they were going out, they'd do it with style. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. The catapult, or weapon of mass dysfunction, as Tarek had dubbed it, was ready to go. The crew gathered in the launch bay, a motley group of misfits standing together against the universe. "All right, team," Alaric said, addressing them all. "This is it. Do or die, live or let die, etc., etc. You know the drill." Sable gave him a thumbs up. "Just say the word, Captain." "On my mark," Alaric replied, his tone steady despite the chaos around them. 3, 2, 1. The improvised projectile shot out of the launcher with a sound that was more a strangled wheeze than a triumphant roar. It spun through space, a ramshackle hunk of metal and hope, hurtling toward the Qatari systems. For a moment, everything hung in suspended animation, the universe holding its breath as the projectile closed the distance. And then, with a burst of light and a soundless explosion, it struck its target. "Well, I'll be damned," Zara muttered, awe and disbelief mingling in her voice. "Looks like we've got a few tricks left," Alaric said, his grin wide and wolfish. The Qatari systems flickered, their signal-jamming capabilities momentarily disrupted. It was a small victory, a temporary reprieve, but it was enough to send their message hurtling through space. Back in the comms room, Naya was frantically working the controls, sending out signals like her life depended on it, because it did. She wore the expression of someone who'd just been handed a winning lottery ticket, only to realize it was written in an alien language. "I think it's working," she called out, her voice barely containing her excitement. "I'm picking up responses, weak but they are there." Alaric let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. Let's hope they come with the cavalry." The crew waited, hearts pounding, hope and fear warring for dominance. It was a surreal moment, the kind that stretched time into eternity, where every second felt like a lifetime. "We've done our part," Sable said, standing beside Tarek. Her voice was firm, steady. "The rest is out of our hands." Tarek nodded, his usual flippancy replaced by a solemnity that felt foreign. "Here's hoping we've pissed off the right people." On the bridge, Alaric and Zara watched the monitors with bated breath. They were still far from safe, the moon a constant presence, but for the first time they had a sliver of hope. "Think they'll come?" Zara asked, her eyes fixed on the screens. Alaric shrugged, his expression inscrutable. Who knows, but we've done everything we can. Now we wait and see. Waiting's never been my strong suit, she admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. Patience is just laziness in disguise, he replied, a lopsided grin on his face. But sometimes it's all we can do. The seconds ticked by, each one heavier than the last, a countdown to whatever fate awaited them. The universe might have been indifferent, but the crew of the Solstice was anything but. They were stubborn, irreverent, and unyielding, and they weren't about to go down without a fight. As they waited, the tension palpable in the air, a new sound filled the comms room. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew louder, clearer, a chorus of voices cutting through the void. Naya's eyes widened, disbelief etched across her features. "Captain, we've got a response. They're coming." Alaric let out a bark of laughter, the sound echoing through the ship. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like we've got a cavalry." Zara punched the air, a rare moment of unbridled joy breaking through her usual stoicism. "About time." The crew erupted into cheers, the sound echoing off the walls, a defiant roar against the universe's apathy. It was a moment of triumph, of vindication, a reminder that even in the darkest times they could still find the light. "All right, folks," Alaric said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got a fighting chance. Let's make sure we're ready when they get here." With renewed determination, the crew set to work, their spirits lifted by the promise of reinforcements. They were still David facing Goliath, but now they had a few more stones in their sling. As the stars looked on, they stood together, a ragtag group of misfits and malcontents, defiant and unbroken. They might have been the universe's underdogs, but they were far from beaten. And as the universe watched, maybe it was starting to root for them after all. The briefing room smelled like desperation mixed with the usual burnt plastic aroma. It was even more crowded than usual, with the gang all huddled around the holographic display. The moon loomed large on the screen, a reminder that no matter how big you were, someone always wanted to blow you up. "All right, folks," Alaric Cade said, adjusting his jacket as if that would somehow help. "We've got a giant space gun pointing at us, a half-baked plan, and a whole lot of nothing to lose." "Sounds like a good day to save the world, don't you think? Speak for yourself," muttered Tarek Mendel, his hands stained with various greases and his eyes lined with the shadows of 100 caffeine-fueled Iors. "I was hoping for a nap." "Optimism," Tarek Zara Voss said with a grin, though her eyes told a different story, one of skepticism and weariness. "It's the only thing that keeps us from throwing ourselves out the airlock. Thanks, Zara. Your motivational speeches are always a joy," he replied, rolling his eyes. Sable Thorne stood with her arms crossed, looking every bit the reluctant mastermind. "Let's remember, this plan hinges on ancient Earth tech. The kind that's barely more advanced than throwing a rock and hoping it hits something important." Naya chimed in from her corner, not one to miss a chance for sarcasm. "Oh, great. We're betting on the equivalent of a cosmic slingshot. Remind me why we're not just surrendering." "Because we're stubborn as hell," Alaric said. "And because there's something deeply satisfying about sticking it to an alien race that thinks they can push us around." Zara nodded. "Plus, who doesn't love a good underdog story, right?" Alaric said, clapping his hands once as if to shake off the doubt. "Let's make sure this becomes one." They dispersed to their stations, each member of the crew carrying the weight of potential failure on their shoulders, but masking it with humor and bravado. They had faced improbable odds before, and while the stakes were higher now, so was their resolve. In the engineering bay, Tarek and Sable were piecing together the final components of their makeshift projectile. Wires hung like vines, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of solder and burnt hopes. "You think anyone's ever tried this before?" Tarek asked, narrowing his eyes at a particularly stubborn bolt. "Probably," Sable replied, not looking up. "They're dead now, though. Comforting, that's me." A ray of sunshine. Soon enough they were ready. The catapult was loaded, their plan as good to go as a jury-rigged piece of junk could be. They had spent hours refining the trajectory, calculating the odds, and drinking enough coffee to power a small city. In the launch bay, Alaric, Zara, and the rest of the crew gathered once more. This was it. The moment where they'd either become legends or a cautionary tale. "All right, team," Alaric said, addressing them with a nod. "We're betting on myth over math. If this works, I'll buy the first round when we get back. If not, well, I guess drinks are on the house in the afterlife. Spirits only," Zara added with a smirk. "Let's get this show on the road," Sable said, her hands deftly working the controls. "Ready when you are, Captain," Tarek said, signaling all systems go. "Okay then. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, launch." With a groan of protest, the catapult deployed. The projectile, a mess of scrap, metal, and wishful thinking, soared through space. For a moment, it was almost beautiful, a testament to human ingenuity and recklessness. Suspense gripped the crew as they watched the projectile hurtle toward its target. If the Qatari systems were the universe's biggest bully, then they were about to get one hell of a punch in the nose. The projectile struck with a silent explosion of light, a brief but satisfying testament to their efforts. The Qatari systems flickered and then, incredibly, powered down. "Holy shit," Tarek whispered, awestruck. "Looks like we're the stars of our own holo-serial," Naya commented, her usual sarcasm softened by the sheer disbelief of their success. Alaric couldn't help but grin. Never doubted it for a second. The crew erupted in cheers, high fives, and jubilant whoops echoing through the bay. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The Qatari's weapon was silent, the threat they posed momentarily neutralized. Their control over the moon was no longer absolute, and in that flicker of weakness, the crew of the Solstice saw their chance. "All right, people," Alaric said, pulling them back to the task at hand. "This isn't over yet. We need to take control of that moon before they can reboot." Zara nodded, already moving. "Let's hit them before they know what's happened." With the adrenaline of victory pumping through their veins, the crew launched their shuttle, racing toward the moon with a newfound sense of purpose. They were David, the Qatari were Goliath, and they had a slingshot of their own making. As they approached, the moon seemed to loom even larger, its surface a maze of alien technology and ominous shadows. Tarek guided the shuttle with precision, his hands steady on the controls. "All right, folks, hang on. We're in for a bumpy landing." The shuttle touched down with a shudder, the kind that spoke of a rickety construction and a hope that the universe might just be on their side. Outside, the landscape was eerily silent, the stillness broken only by the crew's footsteps as they disembarked. The Qatari structures rose around them, dark and foreboding. "Feels like we're walking into a haunted house," Naya said, her voice low. "Hopefully without the ghosts." "I'm not in the mood for exorcism today," Zara replied. They pressed on, navigating the alien terrain with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The Qatari had designed this place to be impregnable, but that was before they'd met the Solstice crew. "Anyone else getting the feeling we're about to poke a hornet's nest?" Sable asked, glancing around. "Yeah," Alaric replied. "But I hear hornets hate surprises." They reached the central control hub, a sprawling structure of wires and screens that hummed with a strange, otherworldly energy. The Qatari systems were rebooting, and the crew had precious little time. "All right, Tarek," Alaric said, gesturing to the control panel. "Do your thing, on it," Tarek replied, diving into the tangle of alien tech with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. Sable and Naya stood guard, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They were far from safe, but if anyone could pull this off, it was Tarek. Minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last, as Tarek worked his magic. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his fingers flying over the controls with a speed born of desperation. Come on," he muttered, coaxing the foreign systems to bend to his will. Finally, with a triumphant shout, he stepped back. "Got it. We've got control." The screens flickered, displaying a series of commands in both Qatari script and hastily translated Earth text. The moon was theirs, or at least it was no longer in the hands of their enemies. "Nice work, Tarek," Alaric said, clapping him on the back. "Thanks, Captain. Now let's get out of here before they realize what we've done." The crew hurried back to the shuttle, their hearts pounding with the thrill of the improbable victory. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the tide. As they lifted off, the moon receded into the distance, its threat neutralized and its power now a tool for humanity. Back on the solstice, they gathered in the briefing room once more, weary but victorious. "Well, I'll be damned," Alaric said, a grin spreading across his face. "We actually pulled it off. Never doubted us for a second," Zara replied, though her eyes betrayed the relief she felt. "Yeah, right," Naya said with a laugh. "I think I saw you crossing your fingers the whole time." The crew chuckled, the sound resonating with the satisfaction of a job well done. They had faced the impossible and come out on top, a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. "All right, team," Alaric said, raising an imaginary glass. "To us, and to sticking it to the universe, to us." They echoed, their voices filled with triumph. And as they celebrated, the universe watched, perhaps with a hint of grudging respect for the tenacity of these stubborn, irreverent humans who refused to back down. They had faced their darkest hour and emerged victorious, a reminder that even in the grim universe, there was always room for a little human ingenuity and a lot of stubborn defiance. With their spirits high and their eyes set on the future, the crew of the Solstice knew that this was only the beginning. The universe was vast and filled with unknown dangers, but they were ready. After all, they were the underdogs, the misfits, and the ones who dared to dream. And if the universe had a problem with that, well, it would just have to get used to it. The briefing room was a mess, and not just because they'd won. The aftermath of throwing a cosmic rock at a celestial bully had left them with more than just the good kind of mess, victory hangovers, and a room full of exhausted but grinning faces. Alaric Cade leaned back in his chair, looking like a man who'd just cheated at cards and gotten away with it. "Well, folks, it seems we're not dead." Which, given the circumstances, is a remarkable achievement. Zara Voss, lounging beside him, chuckled. "You mean considering we just turned an ancient piece of junk into the universe's biggest screw you?" "Exactly," Alaric agreed. "Nothing quite like flipping off the galaxy and living to tell the tale." Naya, sprawled out over 3 chairs, snorted. "Did anyone else half expect to see our own guts floating around outside when that thing launched?" Tarek Mendel, the engineer with more caffeine than blood in his veins, waved a dismissive hand. "I would have been more worried if something didn't explode. That would have meant we did something wrong." Sable Thorne, their reluctant genius, smirked. "I guess you could say we exceeded low expectations." The laughter was genuine, tinged with relief rather than mockery. The mood was buoyant, but underlined by the grim fact that winning didn't erase the risks they'd taken, or the ones still looming. As part of the universe's unwritten rules, triumphs came paired with a side of dread. The moon had been returned to its orbit, but who knew what the Qatari would try next? You never really won against an enemy like that. You just bought yourself the time to figure out how to survive their inevitable retaliation. Outside, the moon glowed with the same eerie light it had always had, a cosmic nightlight to a planet that was still blissfully unaware how close it had come to becoming cosmic dust. The solstice had temporarily staved off disaster, but the universe was an unforgiving judge, jury, and executioner, and they'd only managed to pause the trial. "We should probably talk about what happens next," Sable said, dragging weary eyes from the view to the gathered crew. "We've got the moon back, but the Qatari aren't known for their forgiving nature. They'll come knocking sooner or later." "Let 'em come," Zara muttered, her bravado and armor against acknowledging how precarious their situation still was. "We've shown them we're not the easy pickings they think we are." "That's the spirit," Alaric said, knocking his imaginary glass against Zara's. "After all, there's nothing like an encore performance to keep things interesting." Tarek sighed, running a hand through hair that was more grease than style. "Let's just hope the next round isn't a repeat of this one." My heart can't take another near-death experience masquerading as a brilliant plan. And here, I thought engineers lived for that kind of excitement, Naya teased, nudging him with a booted foot. Not when excitement involves flinging ourselves into the black abyss and hoping we land on our feet. I've got a bad back, you know. Sable looked at the ragtag crew, a group she'd never have chosen on paper, but one she'd trust with her life. We should start figuring out how to make this moon more than just a temporary win. If we can leverage it against the Qatari, turn it from a liability into an asset, and pray they don't decide to just blow it up, Zara finished, raising an eyebrow. Exactly. Alaric stood, stretching like a cat that had taken a nap in the sun. Well, team, we've got our work cut out for us. The Qatari might have underestimated us once, but let's not give them the satisfaction of doing it again. We need to strategize, reinforce, and maybe actually read the manual on that ancient tech. A novel idea, Sable said dryly. Reading the instructions after usage. We're trendsetters, Naya said, grinning like she just discovered the punchline to a cosmic joke. Always one step behind reckoning. The room laughed, knowing that behind every jest was the hard truth that their lives were constantly in flux, one miscalculation away from annihilation. But humor was their shield, sardonic wit their sword, and they wielded both with a deftness that belied their dire circumstances. Returning to their tasks, the crew split up, each knowing their roles in this cosmic charade. Alaric felt the weight of leadership, that familiar pressure of being the one to guide them through the murk of space and time, but he wore it well. Like the worn leather of his captain's chair, it had molded to his shape, embraced him as he'd embraced it. The solstice was more than metal and circuitry. It was a fortress of defiance, a haven for those who dared to laugh at the universe even as it tried to crush them. In the engineering bay, Tarek and Sable were already neck-deep in circuitry and diagrams, debating whether the moon's systems could be utilized to give them an edge, or if they'd explode spectacularly in their faces. I say we push it till it breaks, Tarek offered, his eyes gleaming with the mad passion of someone who lived for the gamble. And that's why you're not allowed to touch anything without supervision, Sable countered, rolling her eyes but smiling all the same. Back on the bridge, Alaric surveyed the stars with a practiced eye, aware that out there, lurking just beyond their perception, was a universe that seldom played fair. Think they'll come back with an apology bouquet? Zara asked, leaning against the console, eyes on the same vista. I'm sure they're picking out the finest space chrysanthemums as we speak, Alaric replied, his expression one of mock solemnness. Of course, those flowers might come with a complimentary plasma barrage. Ah, the perfect end to a perfect day, Zara said, grinning. I'll make sure to put on my dancing shoes. Good plan. They'll never expect a waltz as a defense strategy. As the Iors dragged into days, the solstice became a hub of frenetic energy, each crew member playing their part in transforming their temporary win into something more tangible. Repairs were made, systems fortified, and protocols devised. Naya had taken to hanging around the bridge, offering both moral support and caustic commentary as the captain plotted courses and contingencies. So, what's Plan B? She asked, perched on the edge of the console. Plan B, Alaric echoed. There's always Plan B. And C, D all the way to Z, each more desperate than the last. Sounds about right, Naya said, nodding sagely. But I was thinking Plan B should involve less of us dying horribly. That's always the dream. While they joked and jostled, the reality of their situation never quite lifted from their shoulders. The Qatari's silence was an unsettling calm before the storm, their absence a reminder that defeat didn't mean surrender. The moon hung above Earth like a question mark, its presence a testament to human defiance and ingenuity. It served as both a symbol of their victory and a taunting reminder that the war was far from over. In the briefing room they gathered once more, a ritual of planning and camaraderie. Alaric stood at the head of the table, looking over the faces of those who'd risked everything to save their world. All right, crew, he said, his tone light but laced with earnestness. We've bought Earth some time, but we know the Katari won't take this lying down. We need more than just luck and reckless bravery to get through what's coming. Reckless bravery has served us pretty well so far, Naya pointed out, her smile all cheek and teeth. But it can't be our only play, Alaric replied, his voice firm. We need to be smart, anticipate their moves, and stay ahead of whatever they throw our way. I'm working on beefing up our defenses, Sable chimed in, her fingers dancing over her datapad. If we can turn the moon systems to our advantage, we might just have a shot at repelling them when they come knocking. Knocking. More like smashing down the door, Tarek grunted. But I like the optimism. Zara tapped the table thoughtfully. And if we can't hold them off, then we do what we always do, Alaric said. Laugh in the face of danger, shout not today, and make them bleed if they push us too far. They were a motley crew, held together by sarcasm and sheer tenacity, but they were the Solstice's crew. And for all its flaws and rattles, the ship was their haven, a stubborn light in the unfeeling maw of space. So, what's the plan, Captain? Zara asked, leaning forward, her eyes alight with determination. The plan is we keep pushing, keep adapting. We turn every setback into an opportunity. And when the Katari return, we make sure they regret ever crossing paths with us. And if they don't, Naya asked, arching an eyebrow, then we make sure they don't get a second chance to. The room buzzed with the kind of energy that came from knowing you'd faced the dark and kicked it squarely in the teeth. Each of them carried scars, some visible, others etched into their souls, but they were united by a shared defiance, an unwillingness to bow to the universe's whims. As they dispersed to their stations, the tension of the unknown hung over them, but it was tempered by the camaraderie that had seen them through. In the face of impending doom and cosmic uncertainty, they found solace in each other, a ragtag band of rebels with a penchant for sarcasm and a knack for surviving the impossible. The Solstice was more than just their ship. It was a testament to their resilience, their refusal to be cowed by forces greater than themselves. And as they prepared for whatever came next, they did so with the knowledge that they were not alone. As Alaric settled back into his chair, the weight of leadership a familiar comfort, he knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But with his crew beside him, he felt a flicker of hope, stubborn, irrepressible, and entirely human. After all, if they'd learned anything, it was that the universe might not play fair, but neither did they. And in the grand, uncaring expanse of space, they'd carved out their place with laughter, courage, and a healthy dose of irreverence. The Solstice soared into the vast unknown, its crew ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would continue their fight, defiant and unbroken, because in the darkest corners of the galaxy, it was always a good day to be stubborn.